when I watch it back, that was so well done. Like there's a part where I'm punching Steve in the corner and I'm just punching him and wailing on him and he's bleeding and I step back and then he just kicks me right in the nuts.
I was terrified. That is not a quote from a rookie finding his feet. That is not a line from some guy who had one bad night and walked away. That is the honest word used by decorated champions, world-class athletes, and veteran officials who spent years inside the toughest locker room in the world. And every single one of them said it about the same man, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold was more than a phenomenon. He was a revolution. He dragged professional wrestling out of the glitter and gimmicks of the 80s and threw it face first into something that felt completely disturbingly real. The glass shatters, the music hits, the crowd loses its mind. And the man walking down that ramp was not just performing, he was hunting. He was a walking, breathing storm, and the people who had to stand across from him in that ring did not just feel pressure, they felt fear, real fear. The kind that sits in your stomach before you even lace your boots. If you are a fan of real backstage stories like this, go ahead and hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps other fans find stories like this one, and trust me, we have a lot more where this came from. Now here is the thing that makes this story so fascinating. These were not soft men. The people talking about being terrified by Stone Cold were Olympians. They were former world champions. They were 7-foot giants who had spent their whole lives being the biggest and scariest person in every room they walked into. These were men who had trained their entire lives to be tough, hard men, experienced men. Men who had taken their share of punishment long before they ever crossed paths with Austin. And still, when they talk about stepping into that ring with Steve Austin, the word that keeps coming up is fear. So the question worth asking is this: what exactly was it about Stone Cold that made tough veterans feel like they were in over their heads? Was it his size? No. Was it his look? Not just that. Was it some secret move or hidden weapon that nobody else had? Not really. The answer is far more complicated than that, and honestly, far more disturbing. Because the terror of Stone Cold Steve Austin was not one single thing. It was a combination of pace, pain, unpredictability, and a level of professional pressure that turned every single match into a survival test. A test that not everyone passed. And some people paid a serious physical price just for showing up. That is what this video is going to break down. Not the highlights, not the catchphrases, not the championship reigns. We are going into the stories that legends tell each other in quiet rooms. The stories about what it actually cost to step inside that ring with Stone Cold, and once you hear them, you will understand exactly why the word terrified keeps coming up again and again, no matter who you ask. Let us start with the one thing that nobody talks about enough: the pace. When Kurt Angle came into the World Wrestling Federation in 1999, he brought with him a resume that was nearly impossible to argue with. This was a man who had won an Olympic gold medal in freestyle wrestling. A man who had trained for up to 10 hours a day leading up to the 1,996 Olympics. Even on his days off, Angle was doing multiple training sessions. His body was a machine. His conditioning was at the very peak of what a human being could achieve through years of disciplined, relentless work. He had been tested on the biggest stage in amateur wrestling. He had competed under enormous pressure and come out the other side with gold around his neck. If you were picking the one person on the planet least likely to run out of gas in a physical contest, Kurt Angle would be near the very top of the list. And then he got in the ring with Stone Cold Steve Austin in Fresno, California. What happened in that ring in Fresno became one of the most talked about moments in locker room history. Kurt Angle, the Olympic gold medalist, the man who had never been blown up in his amateur career, the man whose conditioning was described as unparalleled by people who had trained alongside him, got completely and utterly exhausted by Steve Austin. He was blown up, done, running on empty, lungs burning and legs heavy in a professional wrestling match, and not just any match. A match against a man who was not an Olympic wrestler, a man who did not have Angle's technical background or his specific athletic training history. What Austin had was something completely different, something that could not be measured on a fitness test or a training chart. He had what people in the business came to call the Austin pace. The Austin pace was not just about being fast. It was not just about throwing a lot of moves quickly. It was something far more calculated than that. Austin understood that the moments between the big moves were just as important as the moves themselves. In wrestling, those gaps are called dead time, the pause between a takedown and the next hold. The moment where both men are getting back to their feet, the brief seconds where the action resets. Most performers use those gaps to let everyone breathe, let the crowd settle, let the heart rates drop a little. Austin filled every single one of those those moments with something. He would glare at his opponent from across the ring, trash-talking, moving constantly, using every gesture and word and look as a tool to keep the other person's nervous system firing, never letting their heart rate drop, never giving them a single second to collect themselves. He understood something that went beyond physical conditioning. He understood that the body has a threshold, and if you keep a man above that threshold without any relief, it does not matter how fit he is. Eventually, he will break. For Kurt Angle, that moment in Fresno was a genuine shock. He had never experienced anything like it in his years of elite athletic competition. His body, the same body that had been pushed to Olympic limits under the most demanding coaching available, could not find a way to keep up. The struggle to breathe in that ring was real. It was not part of the script. It was not a performance choice. Angle was genuinely fighting to stay functional while also trying to do his job and put on a quality match for the audience watching, and Austin knew it. He could see it, and he kept pushing. He never let up, not for a single second. Austin actually turns this story into a running joke when he talks to Angle. He says that since he was able to blow up an Olympic gold medalist, he could have probably won the Olympics himself if he had tried. Angle takes the ribbing well and usually responds by calling Austin something unprintable, but underneath the laughter, the point stands firmly. Austin did something to that man that years of elite athletic training had never done to him before. He found the ceiling of Kurt Angle's conditioning, and he pushed right through it. The way Austin described the Fresno match himself was telling. He never talked about it as a great match or a technical achievement. He talked about it as a test. A test of conditioning, a test of will, and a test of who wanted it more. The fact that an Olympic champion came up short in that test was, to Austin, simply evidence that the standard he held himself to was higher than any gold medal could fully prepare someone for. Here is the truly terrifying part of that. It was not an accident. Austin was not just running fast and getting lucky with the timing. He had mastered the art of keeping an opponent above their anaerobic threshold. He understood the science of exhaustion, even if he never described it in those clinical terms. He knew exactly how to keep the pressure on without giving the other man an inch of recovery time. Every glare, every stomp, every piece of trash talk was a calculated tool designed to keep his opponent flooded with stress. There was no moment of relief, no reset, no mercy. It turned a wrestling match into something that felt more like drowning. You were not just trying to perform, you were just trying to survive. That is a genuinely scary thing to think about when you are walking into that building, knowing that the man across from you has already done this to an Olympic champion. Knowing that your body, no matter how well you have prepared it, might not be able to keep up with what he is about to bring. And knowing that showing any weakness, any struggle to breathe, any sign that you were slipping was going to be noticed immediately by the most intense professional in the entire business. And that was just the pace. Now here's the scary part about what happened when you actually got in there with him. When Paul White arrived in the WWF in 1999, the man most people know as the Big Show, he came with size that was almost impossible to comprehend. 7 feet tall, hundreds of pounds of muscle and mass. He had been a champion in WCW. He had dominated physically in every environment he had ever been in. When you look at a man that size, the word intimidation comes to mind immediately. You do not expect him to be the one who ends up feeling small. You do not expect him to walk into a locker room and feel like a junior. But that is exactly what happened. White himself described the WWF locker room at that time as shark-infested waters. He walked in and he could feel immediately that this environment was different. The culture was harder, more aggressive, less forgiving than anything he had experienced before. There was no gentle settling in period. There was no grace period where veterans showed patience with the new arrival. And sitting at the very top of that food chain, the apex predator in those shark-infested waters, was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin looked at the 7-foot giant and apparently decided that what White needed was not a warm welcome. What he needed was to be broken down and rebuilt. Austin's approach to teaching was not gentle. It was not patient. It was not kind. It was a form of tough love that crossed very clearly into something that felt like professional hazing, and it was deliberate and calculated from the very first moment of the very first night. On a European tour, Austin worked with White for 8 minutes every single night, and for those 8 minutes, he treated White, in White's own words, like dirt on the bottom of his shoe. Austin would stomp him. He would refuse to call any offensive moves for the giant. He would not give White any moments of control or any opportunity to impose himself on the match. Night after night, night after night, across the tour, White was just taking it, absorbing the punishment, feeling humiliated on the biggest stage available, feeling like he was failing a test he did not even fully understand. The message Austin was sending was clear, even if the delivery was brutal. White had been working like a small man his whole career. He had been doing tricks and athletic moves that did not suit a man of his size. Austin was trying to strip all of that away by force and make White tap into something more primal, more dominant, more fitting for a man who should have been the most terrifying physical presence in any building he walked into. The turning point came when Austin lit White's jaw up like the 4th of July. That is the phrase that White uses when he tells the story. Austin hit him for real, with genuine force. merciless. And something clicked inside White that all those words and all those nights of being stomped had not been able to create. The real physical contact finally broke through the habits and the hesitation and the professional politeness. White understood in that moment that he had to fight back, not perform fighting back, actually fight back. And while that moment of clarity was ultimately useful for White's career development, think about what it took to get there. Think about what it felt like to be a 7-foot giant on that European tour, night after night, getting treated like nothing, not knowing if you were passing or failing, not knowing when or if it would end, not knowing what exactly you were supposed to do differently. That is not just physical discomfort. That is a sustained psychological pressure that most people would struggle to endure for a single evening, let alone multiple weeks away from home. The fear of facing Austin was not just the fear of getting hit, it was the fear of failing his test. It was the fear that if you could not handle what he was giving you, if you flinched or complained or could not match his standard, you would not last in that main event environment. Austin was the gatekeeper, and his gate was made of pain. What made it worse for White was that he could not simply go to someone and say Austin was being too hard on him. In that locker room, at that time, Austin was the authority. His approval was the currency that mattered. His standard was the bar everything else was measured against. So White had two options: find a way to survive and rise to it, or find a way out. There was nothing in between. But the ring was not the only place it got dangerous. The rules of accountability in Austin's world applied during matches too, and they were fast and they were merciless. In professional wrestling, a receipt is exactly what it sounds like. If someone hits you too hard or makes a mistake that hurts you, you return the favor. You give them a receipt. It is a way of communicating professional standards, a way of saying that if you make a mistake on me, I will make the same mistake on you, and we will see how it feels from your side. In the Attitude Era, receipts were a normal part of professional life. They were almost expected, but Stone Cold Steve Austin's version of the receipt system operated at a different level entirely. He had zero patience for accidents, absolutely no mercy when it came to returning what he received, and zero delay between the moment it happened and the moment he settled the account. Booker T was one of the toughest performers of that entire era. His working style was described as snug, meaning he hit with real force to make matches feel genuine and to sell the physicality of what he was doing. He and Austin had real chemistry as performers, but that chemistry came with a cost. During one of their matches, Booker T accidentally stiffed Austin, hit him too hard, busted his lip open. It was not intentional. These things happen in a physical contest between two people working at that level of intensity. Austin could not wait to give him his receipt. That is exactly how it was described. He could not wait. Within 10 seconds of the moment it happened, Austin had returned the favor and settled the account. The message was instant, and it was absolutely clear. Do not make mistakes on me, because the correction will come before you even have time to process what just happened. Now, think about what that does to you as a performer. You are in there trying to do your job, trying to work at the level Austin demands, trying to be stiff enough to satisfy him and meet his standard, but you are also terrified of accidentally going too far. Because if you go too far, the consequence is immediate and physical. There is no discussion, no apology accepted, no moment to explain that it was unintentional. Just the receipt, delivered the second it is owed. That creates a psychological weight that follows you through every single exchange. That is an incredibly stressful tightrope to walk. Too light, and you get punished for failing to meet the intensity threshold. Too hard, and you get punished immediately for crossing the line. The window of acceptable performance was narrow, and the penalties on either side were real and physical. Every single strike had to be calculated perfectly in real time. And you had to do that while also managing the pace, managing the psychology, managing the story you were trying to tell, and managing your own body, which was already being pushed past its comfortable limits. And the receipt system with Austin applied equally in big moments and small ones. There was no such thing as an unimportant exchange in his matches. Every single strike and every single bump carried the same level of accountability. There was no throwaway section where you could coast slightly and breathe. The consequences of a mistake were always present, always immediate. Booker T came away from those encounters with genuine respect for Austin. He called him a pretty tough guy, and that respect was earned through shared pain, through matches where the line between entertainment and a legitimate physical contest was, in Booker T's own words, frequently blurred. It was not always clear where the performance ended and the reality began, and that ambiguity was part of what made Austin so genuinely dangerous and so effective. And the chaos was not always limited to the ring. Sometimes it moved into places that nobody expected at all. The Green Frog Market in Bakersfield is a real grocery store, a real business with real shelves, real products, and real customers. And it became the location for one of the most famous segments of the Attitude Era when Stone Cold and Booker T turned it into a brawl that nobody in the building or watching at home was quite prepared for. The segment is remembered for its energy, for the wildness of it, for Austin asking Booker if he wanted a potato before hitting him in the face. People love it. It gets replayed and celebrated constantly as one of the great moments of that era. But what most people watching at home did not fully appreciate was the reality behind the cameras. cameras. There was no script for that segment. Neither man had a prepared plan walking through that door. They were in a real business, around real products and real shelving and real members of the public, and they had to improvise every single second of it without any safety net. That is terrifying in a way that a scripted match in a controlled arena environment is not. When you are in a wrestling ring, you at least know the space you are working in. You know where the ropes are, where the floor is, what surfaces you might land on. In a grocery store, anything can happen. A slip on a wet floor, a badly angled fall into shelving, any moment of lost footing in an environment not designed for physical confrontation. And with Austin calling everything in real time, anything probably would happen. The mental load of keeping up with Austin's improvised ideas in real time was described as a form of exhaustion all its own. Most professional wrestling segments are planned carefully in advance, with sequences agreed upon and spots choreographed so that everyone knows what is coming. Austin's old-school approach of calling the action in the moment, making decisions one beat at a time, meant that his partner had to stay completely locked in at all time. One missed cue, one moment of mental drift, and the whole thing could fall apart in a way that could not be hidden or recovered from easily. Booker T handled it because Booker T was exceptional at reading situations and adapting quickly. But the pressure of performing alongside Austin's creative chaos in a real grocery store with no script and no safety net was a level of stress that most performers would not have wanted to face. The funny memory that fans carry of that segment was built on a genuinely grueling physical and mental experience for the two men living it moment to moment. Booker T has spoken about the Green Frog Market segment as a career highlight, but he has also been honest that performing it in real time was intense in a way that watching the finished version does not fully communicate. The physical reality of improvising a genuine brawl in a public space with Stone Cold Steve Austin is a very different experience from the entertaining clip that fans have rewatched and shared for years. And if you think the terror was contained to the people competing directly against Austin, you would be wrong, because even the referees were not safe from it. Earl Hebner and Mike Chioda were two of the most experienced officials in professional wrestling during the Attitude Era. They had seen everything the business could throw at them, managed some of the most intense matches and most volatile performers in WWE history. These were tough, seasoned professionals who understood their job deeply and executed it at the highest level available, and Austin still made them feel it. For Hebner, working an Austin match meant living with the real possibility of becoming the target of Austin's frustration at any moment. A well-known piece of footage from that era captures Austin explicitly yelling at Hebner to get away from the camera shot when Hebner accidentally stepped into the wrong position during a high-intensity sequence. Not just a look or a gesture, actual verbal aggression, direct and loud, in the middle of the match aimed at the referee for blocking the view of the hard camera. The hard camera is the stationary main camera that provides the primary television feed. It is the lens through which most of the audience experiences the match. Austin understood that everything he did inside that ring was a product being broadcast to millions of people at home, and any obstruction of that visual story was completely unacceptable. When Hebner got in the way of that shot, Austin's response was immediate and had nothing scripted about it. He told him to move, and he was not polite about it. That is a frightening thing for a referee to manage. You are trying to do your own job properly, trying to be in the correct position to make counts and manage the action, and you are simultaneously terrified of accidentally stepping into the wrong spot and igniting the most intense performer in the building. The margin for error was essentially zero. Mike Chioda had his own version of the same experience. Chioda has spoken about working Austin's matches and finding himself blown up just trying to keep up with the pace and take the physical spots that were required to make the chaos look real and believable. Referees in Austin's matches were not passive observers. They were expected to take bumps, absorb contact, and sell the idea that Austin's aggression was so uncontrollable that it spilled over onto everyone in the vicinity. And doing all of that while also maintaining the professional functions of a referee, managing counts, staying in communication with the performers, reading the situation, staying out of the camera shot, was an enormous physical and mental demand every single time. The referees make something very clear with their stories. The terror radius of Stone Cold Steve Austin extended well beyond his opponent. It filled the entire ring. Everyone in that space, whether they were competing against him or officiating the match or just standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment, felt the weight of his standard. The pressure to perform perfectly around a perfectionist of that intensity created a tension that permeated every production he was part of. The referees also had to manage communication between competitors during improvised brawls, making sure both men had the information they needed to keep the action safe. In Austin matches, where improvisation was constant and the pace never slowed, that communication role was harder and more critical than in almost any other match they worked. And all of those stories, the blown-up lungs, the lit-up jaw, the instant receipts, the grocery store chaos, the frightened referees, none of them quite reached the level of what happened at WrestleMania 13. The submission match between Steve Austin and Bret the Hitman Hart at WrestleMania 13 is considered by many to be the most important match in Austin's entire career. It is studied, discussed, and broken broken down by people inside and outside of professional wrestling as one of the finest pieces of athletic storytelling ever produced. And the reason it holds that status is not just because it was executed with precision. It is because it was genuinely, viscerally painful to watch. Because the pain in that ring was not entirely a performance. The WWF had a strict no-color policy at that time. Bleeding was discouraged. The company did not want that element of physical reality on their television product. But Hart and Austin both understood that the story they were trying to tell, the story of a man who would literally rather pass out than admit defeat, required something more than near falls and near submissions. It required a visual that the audience could not look away from, a visual that bypassed everything scripted and hit them somewhere instinctive. It required blood. They made the decision together to do it anyway, against the policy, because they both knew the match demanded it. During the climax, Hart applied his signature sharpshooter, the submission hold he had made famous through years of technical mastery. He held it for nearly 2 minutes. 2 full minutes of a legitimate submission hold applied by one of the most technically skilled wrestlers in the history of the business. And Austin, bleeding from a head wound, blood pouring down his face and into his open mouth, struggled the whole time. That is the word that gets used. Struggled, not sold. Not performed with grace or choreographed precision. Struggled, screaming in real pain, fighting with everything left in his body against the instinct to tap the mat and make it stop. He never did. Austin passed out from the pain rather than surrender. That image, Austin covered in blood, refusing to quit, going unconscious before he would give up, became the defining image of the entire era. People call it the blood from a stone shot, and it worked because it looked completely real. Because a significant amount of it was completely real. The suffering was genuine. The will to not submit was genuine. Everything that the audience felt watching it was a response to something that had actually happened to a real person in front of them. Hart himself spoke about that match as a turning point, not just for Austin, but for the art of professional wrestling. The decision to let the suffering be genuinely visible, to let the audience see what it actually cost, was a departure from the polished presentation the company had favored. It drew a clear line between what wrestling had been and what it was becoming, and Austin drew that line with his own blood. The match also produced a double turn. Austin, who had walked in as the villain, walked out as the hero. Hart, who had walked in as the hero, walked out as the villain. This kind of shift does not get announced. It does not get written into a script. It happens because an audience feels something real and responds to it without being told to. They saw Austin absorb that level of punishment, bleed that much, hurt that visibly, and refuse to break, and something in them recognized genuine toughness when they saw it. The story changed because the reality demanded it, but it also set a terrifying standard for everyone who came after. If that was what it took to beat Austin, if you had to hold a legitimate submission on a bleeding man for 2 minutes, and even then he would not tap, what did any future opponent have to work with? Every performer who faced him after WrestleMania 13 walked into that match knowing exactly what he was willing to endure, and knowing that you had to be willing to endure the same or more. And the pain he inflicted and absorbed was not some random style Austin had stumbled into. It was built deliberately, shaped by influences that understood real contact as the foundation of everything. Austin's most famous persona was the Texas Rattlesnake, the brawler of the Attitude Era. But underneath that persona was a technical foundation that many people never fully appreciated. He had spent serious time working with men who treated wrestling as a genuine combat discipline. Men like William Regal and Fit Finlay, practitioners of the British and European style that prioritized what they called snug striking, strikes that actually connected, holds that actually created real discomfort, a style built on the principle that if it looks like a fight, it is because in important ways it is a fight. Regal himself noted that only a small number of performers were truly willing and able to work the stiff, demanding style that Austin operated in. He identified himself, Finlay, and Chris Benoit as the few who were genuinely equipped for it. Regal said directly that when Austin or Regal hit someone, there was a lot of real contact. Not simulated contact, not carefully managed near contact that looked convincing on camera, actual real contact that the person on the receiving end felt throughout their body. This was a calculated risk. It increased the likelihood of genuine injury. It made the work harder and more physically demanding for everyone involved, but it ensured that the matches carried a quality that stood completely apart from everything else in wrestling at that time. In an era full of elaborate gimmicks and pre-planned athletic spots, Austin's matches looked and felt like genuine combat, because they were closer to genuine combat than most fans ever fully understood. The influence of Terry Funk and Stan Hansen also gave Austin something that the British technical tradition alone could not provide. It gave him the willingness to operate as though completely out of control in a way that felt genuinely dangerous to everyone watching. Funk and Hansen had built their careers on making audiences believe the match could go anywhere and nobody was fully safe. Austin absorbed that quality completely. The blend of Texas brawling from influences like Terry Funk and Stan Hansen, combined with the joint manipulation and snug striking of the British catch tradition, combined with elements of the stiff physical realism associated with Japanese strong style, created something that no other single performer could replicate. Austin could adapt the the specific version of his intensity to whoever he was facing. Against Kurt Angle, he could blow him up with relentless pace that exceeded an Olympic champion's threshold. Against Booker T, he could exchange receipts until a clear hierarchy was established. Against someone younger or less experienced, he could use the pace and the stiffness together to overwhelm them before they even understood what was happening or how to respond to it. No one was immune. No style of opponent was safe. The specific brand of terror Austin brought to that ring had a targeted version available for every single person he stepped across from. And then 2001 arrived, and the version of Stone Cold that emerged from that year was something new and something genuinely unsettling. After aligning with Mr. McMahon and Triple H, Austin entered what became known as the two-man power trip era. The fiery rebellion of the late 90s, the working-class hero who smashed authority and cracked beers and told the boss exactly where to go, that version was gone. What replaced it was described by people inside the business as psychotic, fixated, and paranoid. The intensity had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown darker and more concentrated. But it had lost any hint of warmth or fun. It had become a cold, calculated brutality with one purpose: maintaining status, maintaining dominance, at any cost and without concern for who paid that cost alongside him. For younger performers like Matt and Jeff Hardy, the Hardy Boys, stepping into this version of Austin was a completely different kind of test. These were not established veterans with years of experience navigating the intensity of a main event Austin match. They were talented performers who had earned their place in a feud with Austin and Triple H through hard work and creative output. And what they got in return was described by Matt Hardy as hellacious matches where the veterans showed little to no regard for the well-being of their younger opponents. Matt Hardy talked about the pressure of those encounters. He described Austin's character during that period as a ticking time bomb. The explosive quality that had always been part of Austin was still there, but the version of that explosion in 2001 had no warmth underneath it. There was no lesson being taught. There was no door being opened for a younger performer to walk through once they proved themselves worthy. There was just the brutality, unmodified, and the younger performers had to find a way to navigate it without a map or a guide. The 2001 era also revealed something about Austin that the rebellious hero persona had partially concealed. The intensity was not a performance choice he picked up at the curtain and put down when the match ended. It was part of his professional identity at a level that went beyond any scripted character. The paranoia and fixation of that period were the same engine running hotter and without the warmth that had made it more bearable to be around in earlier years. The fear in those matches was not only about the physical pain, it was about the professional reality of being young, being relatively untested at that level, and being placed opposite someone who was operating at maximum intensity without building any kind of safety net into the experience for you. The cost of that was real, and it was not always distributed fairly. And yet, even in that paranoid villain version of Austin, something remained that audiences could not ignore. His will to win was so overwhelming and so genuine that even when he was playing the role of the bad guy, the crowd kept finding reasons to respond to him. During the Invasion storyline, Austin's aggression was framed as the WWF's defense against the combined forces of WCW and ECW. Even working as a villain, the intensity was so real and so compelling that audiences could not hold the narrative against him. They were supposed to boo him, they wanted to cheer him, because the truth of his presence cut straight through every story layer placed over it and hit them somewhere more basic and more honest than any script could reach. Because for every story where the tough love produced something genuinely valuable, where Big Show found his identity through the pain of those European tour nights, there is another story about a performer who went through the same experience without that payoff. For every receipt that maintained a standard of professional excellence, there was a moment where the line between accountability and cruelty became very hard to locate. Stone Cold's standard was extraordinary, but extraordinary demands leave marks, and not all of those marks are ones the person carrying them would choose to keep. But here is where you have to land when the entire story is laid out in front of you. Stone Cold Steve Austin changed professional wrestling, not adjusted it, not refined it at the edges. Changed it completely, permanently, and in a direction the business had never gone before. He took a product built on spectacle and character and turned it into something that felt like truth. He made millions of people feel on a gut and instinctive level that what they were watching was real, that the man in that ring was genuinely dangerous, that the outcomes were genuinely uncertain. And that feeling, that complete suspension of disbelief achieved through sheer force of physical commitment, is a standard the industry has never fully reproduced. The legends who faced him came out of those experiences harder, more credible, more capable of filling a building with the feeling that something genuine was happening in that ring. The crucible he created made performers better even when the process was brutal and painful. And the fans who watched it, who saw the blood at Wrestlemania 13 and the chaos at the Green Frog Market and the relentless never-ending pace every single week, those fans got something they did not know they needed until Stone Cold gave it to them. They got a reason to believe. A real one. He was the shark in those infested waters, the apex predator in a locker room full of dangerous men. And the waters are quieter without him, more carefully managed, safer, perhaps, but quieter. And smaller somehow. Because rooms feel different when the most dangerous thing in them is gone. And sometimes, if you are honest about what wrestling can be at its very best, you want the shark back in the water. If you have stayed with this story to the very end, drop a comment below and tell us which account hit you the hardest. Was it Angle in Fresno? Was it Big Show on that European tour? Was it the blood at Wrestlemania 13? Let us know. And make sure you are subscribed so you never miss another story like this one. If you want more fans to find this video, go ahead and hit that hype feature one more time before you go. We appreciate every single one. We will see you in the next one. And remember, the glass can shatter at any time.